Our next speaker, Dr. Andrew Coates, is editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Cardiology. He is a professor of medicine at the University of Sydney, Australia. He was Dean, Faculty of Medicine, University of Sydney from 2002 to 2009. He has written over 1,000 scientific publications and 10 textbooks. In this session, he will give away some of his secrets on how to write a manuscript that editors will accept, tips for authors. Dr. Coates.
Gita, ladies and gentlemen, it was a great pleasure to be here and a great honor to follow Dr. Roberts. Clearly, when there are 4 editors, you will get familiar themes coming through. And when I'm assessing the title of Tips for Authors, it's important we realize that it's the quality of the scientific research that is far and away the most important thing for any study. However, it's very important if you have quality research, you want to see it published and you want to see it read. So therefore, it's very important to consider the audience. When you are looking at a publication, you need to ask yourself, why is it important that this paper is published? We don't just publish purely to any research that comes out. It must add something. Ideally, it should be novel, it should be definitive, it should be interesting. If it's all 3, it's a fantastic paper. It is rare to be all 3. But if it's none of those 3, it will not be read and probably should not be published. Novel is the one thing that's probably crucial. If it is purely supportive or repetitive, when there is no need for repetition, then it really is a question whether this will ever get published. Some things are repetitive. If we have a major clinical trial, then a second major clinical trial to confirm that result is important. But if you are number 12 in a row of things that aren't definitive outcome studies, then it's a question of whether it's ever going to get published. Things can be repetitive things can repeat previous studies if they've done it in a way that's better, if the methodology is more sound, if the numbers are greater, or if it's expressed, it answers problems in previous work, and Bill Roberts has already referred to that. The third one is, I think, the one that's absolutely crucial. It's you don't just put up data for the sake of putting up data and write endless introduction discussion. It's important that you think the audience want to read this. If information has to be transferred, it's important that the reader understands what you're trying to do. So, key considerations. There's a thing called an elevator pitch. And that is, and many of you will know that, if you have a very short opportunity to grab someone's attention and you want to transfer a message across, how can you do it? In 3 sentences. And when you've finished the paper, written according to Bill Roberts' very important result and advice, at the very end of it, realize some people will only read 3 sentences. And that might be the editor who first looks at it initially. The title is an important aspect. Then the first 2 sentences say why you did the study in the abstract and what the study was, and then often people will leap straight to the conclusions. What did you find? So it's very important that you understand what are the key 3 sentences I would do if I met Dr. Roberts, Dr. Rowland, or some other editor in an elevator, and they said, I've got a paper, and what we did was this, and what it showed was that, and we think it's important because. If you cannot express the synthesis of your paper in those 3 sentences, you can't write a good paper, because it's when you realize those 3 powerful messages, then you will always come back to that, and you'll make sure you write it in a way where those messages are clear. Often, putting in more stuff is harmful. If it's boring or confusing, people lose focus. They either will not finish or they will not finish up understanding what your message was in the first place. There is an issue. We're very proud of the fact the International Journal of Cardiology is a very international journal. We accept and encourage different styles of expression. However, it must be clear, and so it's very important that the paper is reviewed by someone fluent or native in the language of publication, because it's very common to have to reject a paper because the language is confusing And reviewers, my observation is, get very angry if they don't understand or they see too many errors, and it's well worth it. It will save you a lot of time in the long run. It's not a thesis. It's not a definitive report of everything you could possibly say, so cutting out text is often the best thing you can do. The discussion, Bill's already mentioned quite a lot about that. It needs to be, and I really like his analogy of a tree, taking a few points out to the logical conclusion. It should not try and be comprehensive. It must be relevant to what's important, and I often find that the vast majority of discussions are far too long. They should be focused on the novel features, the controversial features, and why what you found hadn't been found before, why it differs to previous publications, and why haven't we seen this in the past. I would go through as an author a checklist. Why am I submitting to this journal? And I often find that some people aren't clear why they're submitting to a journal. It's just they go through a checklist and they say, well, let's try this one. Have they taken work like this before? Is it in their field of interest? Is it the style that they would like to see? So it's very important you do that due diligence of style and referencing, but also in subject content and readership. Is it the right journal? Triple check for errors. Journal, when you're writing a cover letter to the journal, get the journal name right. People often do recycle and you'll get the wrong one. Editor's name, formatting instructions, submission instructions are crucial. The more errors there are, the less your chance you'll get accepted. What will the reviewers want to see? They will want to see that you have referenced the most similar papers out there. There is nothing more irritating than someone writing a paper and the closest paper to that paper is just ignored. Clearly, you don't know whether they are not aware of it, they disagree with it, therefore they want to ignore its presence, or it was just an accident. It's important the authors discuss their prior work because often research is incremental and it's very important to know the basis upon which this study was done and also declare outright any overlap. If some of the patients you report on have been reported before, some of the experimental work's been done before, you've used similar methodology, refer to the previous one. That is not just boosting your own citations. It's very important you declare upfront what's new about this paper, what depends on previous publications. Lastly, be extremely careful. Plagiarism is becoming horrendously common. There are estimates that 1 or 2% of all publications in the medical area include fraud. Plagiarism is probably even more common. The number of complaints, the number of investigations we do is going up horrendously. Virtually a week does not go by that I don't get a complaint about plagiarism, evidence of dual publications, disputes about authorships, and complaints about the quality of data. Be aware that the tools for detecting plagiarism are extremely strong now. And I'm not referring to those people who are deliberately plagiarizing, and there is no role for that in science, but people accidentally plagiarize. And they do it because computers can cut and paste text from one to another. You put it into a document, you recycle it, and before you know it, there's a whole paragraph or two that's come from someone else. The most important thing you can do for a young researcher is to tell them never to write anything down, never to cut and copy paste into a manuscript, and never write anything down with another journal or book open. It must be written totally from your own brain, because that's the only way to avoid the risk that you will accidentally copy an idea, a sentence, or form of words from someone else. Dual submission is extremely common. We do not have the technology to detect dual submission because papers are confidential until they're published. But the number of times, at least once a month, I get a reviewer telling me, I've reviewed that paper for another journal and it's still under review. We have had in the last 12 months, 12 cases where there is definite evidence we've found another journal where the same paper is simultaneously submitted to both journals. It will be found out. It's a big mistake to think you'll speed up the process by submitting to 2 journals simultaneously. Lastly, make sure your co-authors know you've submitted the article. Make sure they've approved it. Many journals now require signatures of authorship. I personally have been involved where a major publication went with forged signatures, including my own. It happens, and journals haven't yet worked out a way of doing it. But the most common complaint we get is after a paper is published, someone says, I was an author, I didn't give approval, or I should have been an author and I wasn't mentioned, or people complaining about the order of authors. Get that absolutely sorted out first, because it causes enormous problems, and I think journal editors may soon be in a position of having to contact all authors of submitted manuscript to say, are you absolutely satisfied with this manuscript? Are you satisfied with the authorship? Are any authors not there? And are the authors in the right order? Also, don't add authors after acceptance. That's a very common procedure. So it's a checklist of my personal bugbears of what authors do wrong, and if they do it right, then the good quality science will come through. This is just a way not to damage your publication. Thanks very much. Lastly, oh no, I'll skip that. Thank you.